Bienvenidos a mi canal. Today I'm gonna show you what I've been cooking for a while now. I'm kind of embarrassed to say that, but I'm gonna show you how to make this sculpted epoxy resin bag. I will be giving this away along with the new Louis Vuitton card holder to one of you guys, so watch till the end of the video to see how you can win. So let's get to it. Before doing anything, you want to establish what kind of design you want the bag to look like and what the dimensions would be. Once you got that done, you can make the armature as the base for the sculpture. For mine, I made it tall and thick, just like me. Just kidding. I have like twig legs and twig arms. I made it tall and thick enough to fit a phone and a card holder. I made templates out of foam board with the dimensions, and I made a spacer template so I can mark on the wire mesh what I need. Think about this like the space as for seam allowance. So at the end, you should have one mesh piece for the bottom base, two for the widest sides, and then two for the narrow sides. To cut all of this, I did use wire scissors for quicker and smoother cuts. All right, next part, you'll have to cut some aluminum wire, which I think in the crafting world, they call it sculpting armature wire. So for this, what you want to do is wrap the wire around the foam board templates and overlap the ends of the wire about like an inch. After roughly cutting it out, you can bend the corners more precisely and closer to the edges of the template. And now that you got one done, replicate that piece to make the other side identical. Then do the same thing for the narrow sides. Wrap it around the template, cut, overlap, and bend corners nicely. The second side, you'll replicate the piece you just did so they can be identical. The last piece will be the bottom base, which you'll only need one. I didn't measure these, but I think they are about 1.5 inches long. I cut 10 of them, and we're gonna call them straps, so keep that in mind. Now, it's important to try to get these sides even, so with the scissors, mark the ends of the wire while being wrapped around the foam template. Then you can take the wire off the template and wrap the wire ends with the wire straps that we cut earlier. Make sure to keep the wire ends aligned to each other at the markings, and definitely use some pliers to tighten up the twist and flatten the ends. All right. Good job, girly. You got them all done. So now we're going to attach each side together by twisting the straps to join each side. How you do it on one side, you'll have to replicate it to the other side so the structure is nicely balanced, even, and aligned. No wonkiness. We don't want no wonkiness. Once you got all the sides together, the next step is to attach the aluminum mesh. The first side I start with is the base, and I wrap the edges of the mesh around the wire, which I use the pliers and the scissors to help me ease this wrap around, and I flatten the edges with it too, just like this, crisp and clean. Then do the narrow sides the same way by wrapping the mesh edges onto the wire, and then do the same thing to the wider sides. At the end, the trick that I did is I slit cut some of the mesh edges to really twist those ends into the wire so it gets a better hold. And it's just so it doesn't completely fall apart while working with it. But at the end, you should have this nice little structure. Get you some oven baked clay. I got this from Amazon. You're going to want to warm it up by rolling it and molding it with your hands. And I flattened it to maybe 1/16 of an inch thickness. It doesn't have to be exactly this. I'm just trying to give you an idea. This part is just to give us a surface to work with and have everything packed up together nicely. So do this for the whole outer first, and then you can move on to the inner of the bag. The easiest way to go about it is by doing each section separately. Just pat and press the clay onto the surface so it gets really nice and very grippy, and just squish the edges together to mend each panel. And then rub the seams with the finger pad, well, your finger pad, and then smoothen the lines. Alright, petunias, now comes the most tedious part, and that is to make the fabric effect with the clay. I had to learn patience when I did this. I kid you not. I cried making this because I couldn't get it right, but eventually we got it. So no te agüites. If you can't do it on the first time, that's okay. You're gonna have to do it a few times. This is a workout. I am sweating. My hands, my arms hurt. They're sore. And this is the second day because I couldn't get it the first day, so this is my second attempt. I used cornstarch to not have the clay stick to the countertop, and you're gonna wanna knead it, roll it, mush it, pop it, lock it, drop it, so you can get a nice malleable material to work with here. Once I rolled it out, I think it was about like 1/8 to like 3/16 of an inch thick, so you can then easily mold it, or not mold it, but fold it and drape the clay against the base structure of the bag. Think of it as if you're just draping fabric, and maybe get some pictures for inspiration of how that looks. Don't try to be so perfect about it, how it lays. Let the clay do its thing, but also give it some direction of how it folds and flows. Do keep in mind where you'll want the end of the drape to meet at. Mine is at the center back, so I cut the clay at the back and then kind of just squished it against the clay on the base structure of the bag. You kind of just smoothen it with your fingers. You don't want it to be too thick, so the flatter the better. Okay, now that you cleaned up the back, before we finish it, we want to fill and smoothen the inside of the bag. Okay, this is very important. The inside of the bag, you'll want the base and the whole inside to be smaller than the opening of the bag. So think about it like a trapezoid. The short base being at the bottom of the bag. And I'm telling you this because your girl learned the really hard way and had to destroy the whole sculpture. Not gonna lie, I'm still kind of sad about it. Pero pues ya pasó, right? Now that you got the inside filled, we can finish up the center back. And the way we're gonna do that is by rolling another piece of clay, you know, our little fabric clay here. And basically you're gonna pleat it and then fold it and then drape it over the area, but this time vertically. And honestly, however you want it, but that's just how I finished mine. Once you're done with that, you fill in any areas that are cracked. You can smoothen the folds and transitions between the exterior and interior layers of the clay. There was a lot of cracks and imperfections on mine, so I made sure to clean it and touch it up, and it should all look nicely cleaned up in the inside as the outside. The better the sculpture is before baking, the better the epoxy resin product will come out at the end. So take your time. All right, girlies, so once you got all those areas cleaned up and filled, we can bake our bag. So you're gonna preheat according to what the instructions of your clay says. Mine says 275 degrees Fahrenheit. And I got this oven safe work mat so it doesn't get stuck on the tray. Yeah, and once your oven reached your desired heat, you can place the bag in the oven. The clay's instructions says 15 minutes per 1/4 of an inch of thickness, so that's what I did. Now comes the fun part, which is to sand the bag to get rid of any bumps and imperfections. First, I used the 320 grit, then the 600 grit, and then I finished it up with the 1500 grit for a smooth touch. The sandpaper that I got is wet and dry, and I used them with water so then they wouldn't be like dust everywhere. And with a little trapito, you just wipe the residue off, and dude, look how buttery smooth this looks. If you got cracks or areas to fill, you can use this liquid polymer clay and pour some drops to your regular clay and then mix it up until it gets this pasty consistency. I filled in small cracks, medium cracks, and large cracks. It's very important to fill in the big spaces, especially where we made that center back closure, because if you leave it open when it's time to pour the silicone mold mixture, it will definitely get through those holes and ruin your whole mold. And I may be saying this from experience. So I know it's tedious, but it will be definitely worth it. Now you can put it back in the oven. It's set to preheat oven at 300 degrees Fahrenheit and to let it bake for 15 minutes for over 1/4 of an inch thickness. So yeah, now you're really gonna think I'm annoying, but I did notice that there was some new cracks on the bag and I just couldn't leave it like that. So what I did is that I did a little bit of that liquid polymer clay mixture and filled the cracks, and instead of putting it back in the oven, I used a hot pen to the areas I filled. But just be careful to not leave it on one spot for too long, or else it will bubble and burn. The heat of the hot pen will cure the clay pretty quick, so just move it around and check that it hardens, and done. Once you're happy with the sculpture, sand it lightly with the 1500 grit sandpaper to get a smooth feel. And done, you got your sculpture completed. Moment of silence to appreciate this moment. The next step is to make the silicone mold. I made a box to encase the bag in to pour the silicone mixture. The box is out of foam board and the burnt orange stuff is made out of like non-drying sculpting clay, which really you do not need. Hot glue and foam board should be good enough for the silicone to not seep through. I just used it because I was like, why not? I got the silicone rubber mold making kit from Amazon. I got like 4 sets of the 5 pounds, but I think I ended up using less than that. So the amount you actually need depends on how big your sculpture is and how big the box is. Alright, so the instructions says to use 1-to-1 weight ratio of A and B. So go ahead, make the mixture and then mix it all up for like 3 to 5 minutes. Then pour the silicone slowly and little by little to avoid any bubbles. Well, you can't really avoid all the bubbles, just eliminate, reducing the amount of bubbles. Oh, and first pour into the bag or else your bag will float. Like what happened to my first try. Dude, literally so many lessons learned making this thing. You want the silicone to fully cover the bag and give it like a good 1 inch at the top. After letting it cure for 24 hours, you can take the mold out the box. And now, this is a very important step. You want to carefully take out the sculpture out the mold. I already planned that the way I'm gonna take this out is by having one seam on each side. So with an X-Acto knife, I cut an opening at the bottom of the bag and then cut a very zigzag cut on the sides of the bag. You want it zigzaggy because when it's time to pour the epoxy, it will be a nice grip and it will nicely close the sides. And you know how I told you to make the inner like a trapezoid with short base at the bottom, yada yada yada? Well, it's to avoid having to destroy your sculpture. You really don't need the sculpture anymore, but it would have been nice to keep it. But also, if you wanted to do revisions, you could have made it with it, so make sure to do that. I truly couldn't believe I couldn't take the sculpture out. I tried so hard to pull out the bag, but it just wouldn't budge, and at this point, I would prefer to destroy the sculpture than to destroy the actual mold. Alright, so you don't have to do this step if the inner of your bag didn't have this problem, but since mine did have this issue, I shaved down the inner portion of the bag so when I pour the epoxy resin into the mold, I will be able to smoothly remove the bag out. Basically, I just made the inner of the bag smaller than the bag opening. Since I want the bag to have an iridescent color effect, I will be using the Let Resin chameleon powder in the colors Galaxy and Plum. I alternated between both for more of a color shifting. The set comes with a little brush, but I used a bigger and a longer brush for more, for ease. And just brush this all inside the mold to get deep into the crevices. Just use the tiny bowls it's not like you have these tiny bowls. Use anything that you can do to hold it open on the sides. Once done, it should look like this. It looks really red and pink now, but trust the process, it won't look like this color at the end. Okay, so the next step is the epoxy resin, which is from the same brand that I got the silicone mold making from. First things first, you want to surely wrap the mold with rubber bands. I had to make mine longer, so I tied a few together. But just don't make it too tight because it can cause some deformality to the base of the bag. So watch it out. Okay. To make the mix of the epoxy resin, follow the instructions of the kit. Mine says to measure equal amounts of A and B by volume. It says to slowly pour together and slowly mix together for 3 to 5 minutes. Then you'll want to make the mixture black so the iridescent powder can really pop. So I used the epoxy resin pigment paste, and it says to not use too much and then mix it slowly to avoid bubbles. After mixing, slowly pour the mixture into the mold and you'll want to fill it up to the tippy top. The mixture will get super hot, so don't freak out, because I freaked out my first time thinking I made an explosive liquid because it was steaming hot. I probably made the wrong ratio on the first time, to be honest with you, for it to actually be steaming. So maybe it shouldn't be like actually steaming. Yeah, just be careful. Once you let it cure for 24 hours, you can pop that thing out. We are almost done here. To finish up the piece, I used this gloss clear enamel spray paint to seal the glitter on the sculpture. I did do a few coats to really seal this thing in. Then after letting the spray paint dry, I made more of the epoxy resin mixture, but this time I didn't add the black pigment. While the bag is lifted up, I poured and brushed the epoxy resin onto the bag with a little sponge. This is going to give it the wet look effect, which I think is kind of cool. And just let it cure for a day, but make sure that the drips at the bottom of the bag is wiped off before it completely cures. Unless you want that. Lo que tú quieras. Now to make this bag wearable, I got these D rings from Amazon and this crossbody chain from Coach to complete the look. I used a hand drill to make the holes on the bag to fit the rod and the D-ring. Keep in mind to keep enough space at the top to allow the clasp to enter. Since this design doesn't really have a closure for your things, you can make a fabric bag to hold your things, which kind of defeats the purpose of it being a bag, but yeah, honestly, I did this for the funsies and to do something different to give to you guys. But I do hope that this method gives you inspiration to make a complete different design. Maybe make it even smaller. It doesn't have to be a bag. It can be like a planter, pencil holder, a catch-all for your entrance. This is kind of embarrassing, but I made this bag solely so it can hold the Louis Vuitton card holder. But by how heavy this thing is, damn, whoever gets this bag is probably gonna end up like using it for something else, which is kind of sad. Pues honestly, ni modo. You can use it however you want. If you don't like it, you can throw it away. You know, I mean, I guess you'll just get the Louis Vuitton card holder. If I were to do this again, I think I would have done it in like a 3D printer because it would be lighter to hold. But yeah, this is what we got. All right, chiquillas finas. So to win this and the Louis Vuitton card holder, you have to subscribe to this channel. Follow me on TikTok and Instagram, and then comment down below done when you're done. Yeah, pretty simple. I truly hope you liked this video and got inspired by it. Next video, I will be doing a thrift vlog and haul. So I'll see you guys on the next video. Bendiciones a la niña. Bye.